Thank you for inviting. I'm starting immediately for time. Diaries and correspondences have considerable advantages compared to later recollections in written or oral form as sources of history writing. Mainly, these reflect much more directly the immediate thoughts, beliefs, and emotions of a certain person concerning her environment and the actual time she experiences. Haralambos Pantazolu's correspondence from December 99 to March 1922, which I will try to analyze in my presentation, provides a good example to this. A tradesman from Samsun, Haralambos' letters encompass a rich variety of commercial, political, and personal themes in a very turbulent time for the Ottoman capital. Thus, it provides us with valuable information of how an educated migrant tradesman from the Turkish-speaking Orthodox community of Samsun perceived, felt, and acted on the world historic developments around him. The correspondence is comprised of 92 letters, of which 60 of them is written in Karmanlidika, Turkish written in Greek alphabet, while 30 are in Greek and only 2 of them is in Ottoman. Some of them are in excellent condition, while others' poor quality creates many difficulties in exact reading. The letters begin at 13 December 99 and end at 7 March 1922, while there is a more than 1 year gap in the letters, starting from 6 March 1920 to 20 July 1921. As we will see below, the content of the letters differs greatly before and after this gap. The author of these letters, Haralambos Pantazoglou, is a member of the Greek Orthodox community of Samsun. Born around 1886-1887, Haralambos graduated from the schools of his community. After the second half of the 19th century, Samsun had developed into a regional commercial center, attracting many migrants from Turkish-speaking Orthodox communities of Inner Anatolia. It seems that Pantazoglou's parents were among those migrants originating from Kayseri who had been attracted to the increased opportunities the city offered. This explains the widespread Turcophony in the Greek Orthodox communities of Western Pontus, in contrast to the communities of the Eastern Pontus. But the increased educational endeavors of Greek communities in Anatolia, beginning from the second half of the 19th century, enables the younger generations to gradually adopt also Greek. Haralambos Pantazoglou's fluency in writing both Karmelite and Greek letters attest this. It can be said that generally Haralambos uses Greek in his letters while addressing the younger ones and educated younger generation, while Karmelite to address his older and less educated interlocutors. Haralambos moves to Istanbul after the end of the Great War and becomes the director of the Istanbul store of his uncle's company, the Mihal Seferoğlu trading establishment. Previously, he had worked in Merzifonk for the same company. The Mihal Seferoğlu firm is mainly occupied with drapery and tobacco trade, conducting business mainly in Western Pontus and with Russia. But money trading or arbitrage seems another important commercial preoccupation, since almost all of Pantazoglou's letters contain a section that enlists the price situation of many foreign currencies. During the first period of the letters, that is from December 99 to March 1920, his main preoccupation seems to be entirely commercial. The great political events and turmoil of the time, the presence of the Entente armies in Istanbul, the Greek occupation of Izmir, the peace negotiations have no place in his letters, which, as we will see a little bit later, contrast largely from his letters written later. His letters from that period are mostly in Karmanlidika and addressed to his uncle, Theodor Seferoğlu, his cousin Koço Seferoğlu, and the representative of the firm in Samsun, Yordan Ayanoğlu. A possible explanation could be the fear of censorship, but it's not possible to arrive to a definite conclusion. But one thing is certain, that the correspondence between Istanbul, Samsun, and Merzifonk is intact, and commercial relations and commercial and passenger transportation between the two cities, despite difficulties, continue unaltered, since Pantazoglu constantly emphasized his intention to visit Samsun and settle his commercial accounts there. Pantazoglu complains constantly in his letters of these months for lack of capital and from the uncertainties and the stagnant state of the Istanbul market. But more importantly, exchanged furious letters, especially with the director of the Samsun branch of the company, Yordan Ağa, and to a lesser extent with his uncle, about the way he conducts business and how much saying he will have in the decision-making of the company. The Samsun branch accuses him from not knowing what he is selling or buying, for sending low-quality products to Samsun, and for his uneconomical transaction. While he will accuse Jordan Ağab for not giving enough information about the state of the market in Samsun and explanations about the commercial opportunities there, and for creating an impression about him that he betrays the Seferoğlu family. Generally, he insists on his autonomy in conducting business and bringing to an end the lack of order through determining the exact duties and rights of the directors and their salaries and benefits. Thus, he will write that under these conditions, he does not want to continue until everyone's duties is determined and cordial relations had been restored. As mentioned above, the second part of his letters differ highly from these first letters. The letters begin from July 1921 and continue until March 1922. While the first letters were almost entirely written to Samsun, in the second part, the destination of letters differ greatly, from Fresno, California to New York, from Gdansk to Warsaw. In these letters, Pandazoğlu gives a vivid account of the political developments of the Ottoman capital and the developments taking place in the Western Anatolian Front and his homeland. But also he reveals his political beliefs, expectations, and above all, the emotions that these world historic developments around him arise. We also gather some information about how these wider developments affect different aspects of the everyday life in the city. Pandazoğlu, that we meet in these letters, is an ardent supporter of Greek irredentism, an active participant of the Pontus movement. While it seems that the problems he faced in Seferoğlu company described shortly above led him to leave the company and open a new store in Zümbüllühan in Eminönü Çakmakçılar Yokuşu. During his letters of July and August 1921, he is enthusiastic from the Greek army's offensive towards Ankara and rejoices from the takeover of Kütahya and Eskişehir. He describes vividly the joy and hopes created by the Greek offensive in the Istanbul Greek community, and especially the atmosphere in the Prince Island, since he had rented a house in Antigone Island for the summer. Thus, he described how the Pringapo and Halki Islands had become almost a Greek naval station, and every evening the illumination from the projections of the Greek ships and the singing of bands with the sailors, different songs, including the anthem dedicated to King Constantine, the son of Eagle, has created a festive atmosphere there. On the other hand, he writes that in the Turkish neighborhoods, silence dominates, while he adds that even in that atmosphere, some Turks did not leave their madness, and rumors revealed that they planned to sabotage Greek and English ships by torpedoing them from Üsküdar. While in another letter, he argues that the English revealed a horrific plan of the Turks, aiming to kill English officers and bring havoc to the city. He also expresses that there are also further rumors that the English finally gave their consent for the takeover of the city by the Greek army, headed by King Constantine himself. Thus he writes, the centuries-old dream will become true. Constantine gave it, and Constantine will take it. Pandazoğlu uses many times this kind of concepts and themes that conveys the romantic dream of a revival of the Byzantine Greek Orthodox Empire centered on Constantinople. In other letters, he will declare his wish for the opening of the closed gate, to complete the unfinished liturgy in the Church of Saint Sophia, and etc. While it must be added that despite these kind of remarks about King Constantine, Pandazoğlu himself expresses himself as an ardent supporter of Venizelos and his Anglophile policy. For him, Venizelos is the liberator, the redeemer of the enslaved Greeks. As it's known, the political division between Venizelists and Constantinists had reached another zenith during that period, and Pandazoğlu, despite the amazement by the successes of the Greek army led by Constantine, continued to support Venizelos and the liberals. Thus, he remarks that Constantine's success, whose past policies he criticizes, rests not in his capabilities, but mainly in England's policy. He also writes about rumors that the Greek army is preparing for a landing in Pontus, that the Greek navy is gathering soldiers in Tekfurda, and that certain local rooms joined the crew of the ships in order to guide them. Thus, he believes that after the Greek army took Ankara, it will move northwards toward Yozgat to join the landed Greek army, and in that way the war will finally be won. The advance of Greek armies, according always to Pandazoğlu's letter, had created gloominess and scare among the Turks, and that they generally treat Greeks very well. He mentions some Turkish tradesmen coming from Samsun, flattering their Greek compatriots, making dalkavukluk in Istanbul, saying that it is impossible to avoid destiny. while Mustafa Kemal, who was threatening everything on land, sea, and air, and thinking that whatever they do, they will get away with it, tries to avoid their certain defeat. He argues that the population of Anatolia has finally turned against Mustafa Kemal and his catastrophic policies. He wrote in Karamanlı'da, "You know the Turks. Previously, those who shouted in support of Enver and Talat in the armistice say, 'Down with them.' They destroyed the country. Then, for a while, they followed Mustafa Kemal. Now his fashion has also ended. These are the last agonies of the monster." But this jubilant attitude will change dramatically. At first, he will get anxious that no official announcements arrives from General Papulya's headquarters for days. He gets suspicious while rise that Turks started to hang flags, celebrate their victory, and Kemalist various announcements declares countless enemy deaths, prisoners, and plunders. He tries to cling to the rumor that the army has only retreated from the north while remain intact in the center and south in order to make an encircling movement. But at the end, the official Greek statement for the retreat will ruin his hopes. Especially his letters in autumn and winter 1921 reveal a bitter disappointment and an intense effort to reorient and reevaluate his convictions and prospects. The atmosphere of the city described by Pandazolu also changed dramatically. He writes that their situation is critical and that they are under great danger. They sit in their stores on a knife edge and expect every moment a policeman to carry them since the Entente powers seems to have abandoned them. While he argues that the Turks have gained courage and decided to strangle the whole Hellenism of Constantinople and they are in great danger. He complains that the Turkish papers of the city are full of threatening articles against the Greeks, exalt Mustafa Kemal and his movement, who until previously had been declared as a rebel by the Entente powers and the Caliphate itself. He adds that on the other hand, the same powers prevent the Greek newspapers of Istanbul to publish even the list of executed Greeks in Amasya. During this period, Pandazolu uses a very bitter language against the Entente powers and expressed vividly his disillusionment from them. For him, they are the primary culprits of the disaster. Pandazolu states one should expect nothing from friends like Italy and France, who provide the enemy financial support and weapons. But what is more hard for him to digest is the neutral attitude of England and US. Where are the pompous declarations of the civilized nations that professedly fought against barbarism and for emancipating the enslaved, he asks in one of his letters, and adds, unheard crimes were committed in front of the eyes of these self-declared civilized gentle powers of the 20th century. Pandazolu states that during the Great War, they had prayed day and night for the victory of the Entente powers, thinking that finally the light of civilization and freedom would reach them. But in the end, Turkey, who had never been able to destroy them when she was most powerful, accomplished that while she is defeated and bounded by a treaty enforced by the Entente powers. I again quote, here it is the pseudo-civilization of the great powers of the 20th century, he remarks. While he harshly criticizes also the neutral stance of the philanthropic and philo-Christian America, especially its apathy towards the destruction of its educational and philanthropic institutions, and even to the execution of some teachers working in American missionary schools in Merzifonds, seems to have shocked Pandazolu. He criticized philanthropic America that its only aim is to collect some orphans and transport them to America in order to make them citizens. He also uses a very harsh language against Admiral Bristol, US High Commissioner in Istanbul, for preventing American missionaries' efforts to report the massacres in Western Pontus, and that he believed that the Greeks of the regions were comitatus and thus deserved their fate. Pandazolu further cites rumors that Admiral Bristol's only concern is to enrich his pocket, while every day he has many women visitors. He adds cynically that perhaps it would have been better for German militarism to have won the war instead of the Entente powers, and everyone would have adapted to her rule. He continues, I quote again, in short, it was futile that until now we are deceived by the Europeans. Either we should have fought and bravely died relying on only to ourselves during the armistice, or we should have become Turks. They come and, he means the Entente powers, they come and deceived us. They said you are free and then they left us. We died in vain, we fall into disgrace, we are exhausted, finished. In some point, he even will become suspicious from the French postal services when some of his letters do not reach their destination. He suspects that the liberal and democratic French hold his letters and even gave them to the Turkish authorities. For the failure in Sakarya, Pandazolu also accused Constantine and his government, which he will describe them as donkeys. He writes that even the Greek government has abandoned them. From the moment the foot of this awful demonic king touched Greece, he wrote, we lost every hope and lost every dream. For him, the army won the victory in Sakarya, but the leaders were defeated, and that's why the army was forced to retreat. In his letters, Pandazolu always depicts the situation in his homeland and gives the latest news from there. While the first period of his letters gives the impression that daily life of the Greek Orthodox of the region continued more or less the same way, during the second period of his letters, the situation has changed dramatically. Deportations, massacres by the hands of Osman Ağa, by the bands of Osman Ağa, and the plight of the survivors will form an important part of his letters. During that period, there is no letter sent from Samsun, and news from the region arrives to Istanbul indirectly, through Muslim acquaintances, mostly tradesmen coming to Istanbul for supplies and trade. According to Pandazolu, the successful Greek offensive had stopped the deportations because of the fear of the Turks for the defeat and because of a possible landing by the Greek forces in Pontus. But the situation will radically change and a new cycle of violence will emerge after the Greek defeat in Sakarya. Even during the war in Sakarya, the government in Ankara decided the expulsion of male members older than 50 of the Orthodox communities of the region to Inner Anatolia. Among them will be his uncle, previously referred, his uncle and Yordan Ayanoğlu, who had exchanged fierce letters during the first period of his letters. There will be a constant theme in his letters, but in the end, he will contact them in Malatya. Also, his cousins, Christos and Sophocles, who had been hiding in the mountains, will surrender because of the amnesty declared by Mustafa Kemal. They will be arrested and deported to Anatolia also. Finding their exact place and trying to meet their needs also preoccupies him. The months following the defeat of the Greek army in Sakarya are full of comments reflecting his depressed state of mind. He wrote, "Let's forget everything from here," writes to his brother and his cousin Isaac, who are in Warsaw, "and think only of ourselves. We are here in danger too. From now on, our lives will depend on keeping what we already have and through hard work. Nobody listens to our sufferings." In another letter to the same, he continues, "From now on, there is no good to us from here. We have to move to good places outside. I wrote all of this because I am intimidated and lost all my hope from here." His desperation will lead him to ask his friend Dr. Theodor Pavlidi, living in Fresno, to search for him a job in order to settle there, since here everything is lost. In another letter, he stresses that those from Samsun feel that they are in danger too in Istanbul, and contemplates whether Romania is a good place to settle. Pandazolu also follows the political activities of the Committee of Pontus and from the start, and in his correspondence we find many details about the activities of the Pontus Committee. While after the defeat of Sakarya, the terrible events in his homeland will force him to assume a new role, and he will start to write some letters to his friends and compatriots living abroad, especially US, in order to give them information about the recent tragedies and, more importantly, to ask their economic assistance for their surviving relatives and fellow countrymen in Samsun or in exile. But this depressed mood gradually will somehow give away, and Pandazolu will try to cling some new glimpses of hope. For example, the election of the staunch Venizelist Meletios Metaxakis to the patriarchal throne at the end of 1921 will give him fresh hope that finally the Greek community will have a firm ecclesiastic leadership. He joins the celebrations of St. Eleftherios at 15th December, which had turned into a feast in Istanbul in support of the Redeemer, that is Eleftherios Venizelos. After many letters that he had expressed his depressed state, for the first time, he states that he is optimistic. Meletios, he argues, will unite the Orthodox and Anglican churches, and we will come under English protection. He declares his belief that Venizelos and Lord George had come to an understanding, while Constantine and Gunaris will soon fall. He argues that in both parties there are traitors, cowards, and corrupt ones who want Greek borders to stop near Athens. But in the end, he declares our centuries-old dreams will come true. He writes, not because we deserve it, but it's because it is in accordance with England's interests. But this time his optimism has limits, or rather it's ambivalent. In another letter he wrote, on the one hand, the papers accuse each other. There are armed attacks against liberals, and the corrupt politicians try to create a schism in the church against the patriarch, and we lose our courage and hope. But on the other, he remarks, Gunaris make energetic diplomatic efforts. They obtain loans. The army is being reinforced and hold its positions. And all of these convince us that our national matters are in good root and that there is no danger. Of course, there are mentions of Turks in his letters. Despite the staunch irredentist attitude, there are certain personalities, tradesmen that he retains his friendship and obtains their help, especially from his mother. Is in Samsun, and the links between his mother and the relatives there are done by certain Turks, Hafiz Mahmud, etc. But I have to be quick. Despite all these dramatic events, Pandazolu's letters continue to focus on business matters. One is astonished how, after, for example, describing in detail the massacres in Bafra, Pandazolu turns rapidly to explain the situation of the market in Istanbul, the price of draperies or of different foreign currencies, or other recent economic developments. Especially his letters to his brother Spiro, this aspect is dominant. Spiro and his cousin Isaac had left Istanbul in order to sell tobacco in Germany and Poland. Pandazolu will be concerned closely with the fate of the tobacco they trying to sell. It seems that the arrival of plenty of tobacco from Russia has decreased its price, so Pandazolu is very anxious about the prospects of his investment. He urged constantly his brother and cousin to sell at least part of the tobacco in price in order to send him some cash to alleviate his debt towards another tradesman from Samsun and his other cousin, with whom his relations deteriorate. His situation will increasingly become desperate, since his debts and lack of capital will force him to seize most of his business and invite another tradesman to his store. Lack of capital will prevent him to take advantage of various business opportunities, especially in drapery, and he laments the lost opportunities that he watches with his hands tied. In his letters, he generally complains from the stagnation in business, that many traders sit idle, and that there are many who went bankrupt due to the crisis and the resulting decrease in commodity prices. It seems that adverse conditions in Anatolia and the instability in Russia hits Istanbul greatly. The only ones that, according to Pandazolu, continue their businesses as before and make profit are the big ones, the old wolves, he says, with great capital, which have the capacity to gather commodities from market very cheaply. Pandazolu also states that with the destruction of Christianity, every business in Anatolia passed in the hands of the Turks, while he adds that Christians cannot conduct business in Istanbul either. But in the end, Spiros and Isaac will be able to sell the tobacco, and this will somehow relieve him economically. Despite his constant economic difficulties that he is expressing, Pandazolu always stays as a consolation the violent end of those remaining in Samsun or other places in Anatolia, that they lost both their properties and their lives. Fortunately, we saved our lives, he remarks in one of his letters. Money could be earned easily. This thought, expressed in his letters several times, seems to ease his distress about material difficulties and give strength to him for new beginnings. Obviously, his letters have personal details about his sister, about the effort of him to find a suitable groom to him, about his new home in Gedikpaşa, a mainly Turkish-speaking Greek neighborhood, etc. But in order to cut it short, I will skip them. Pandadazoğlu's last letter is from 7 March 1922. From his family refuge card we possess, that after moving in Greece, we can safely assume that he and his sister left Istanbul after the final defeat of the Greek armies in Western Anatolia in late August 1922. Since he had come to Istanbul after the end of the Great War, he cannot claim the établi status. One also can assume that, being an active supporter of the Venizalist policies, he must have left the city even before the final takeover of Istanbul by Ankara forces and the compulsory population exchange, in fear of his life, like thousands of others. His only consolations, we can infer, is that he finally reunites with his mother, Anastasia, which was in Samsun, since the family refuge card also mentions her and has a photo of her together as a family. Thank you for listening.